The Caribbean is on the brink of explosion. 3 U.S. warships carrying 4,000 Marines are heading toward Venezuelan waters. President Maduro has mobilized 4.5 million militiamen in response. Regional allies are choosing sides. And for the first time since the Cold War, Latin America faces the real possibility of direct military confrontation with the United States. This is the story of how a drug war excuse might trigger the next global conflict. This is a bare-knuckled fist fight. Started with money, lots of it. The Trump administration has doubled its bounty on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to $50 million. That's more than most countries' annual defense budgets offered for one man's head. But this isn't just about drug charges anymore. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt made the administration's position crystal clear.
The Maduro regime is not the legitimate government of Venezuela. It is a narco-terror cartel. In Maduro, it is the view of this administration, is not a legitimate president. He is a fugitive head of this cartel who has been indicted in the United States for trafficking drugs into the country.
$50 million for Maduro, $25 million for Captain Diosdado Cabello, $15 million for General-in-Chief Pedrino Lopez. The U.S. isn't just targeting a president. They're pricing the heads of Venezuela's entire military leadership. This is regime change with a price tag. The charges? Leading something called the Cartel de los Soles. The Trump administration claims Venezuela's government itself is a criminal organization. But as we're about to see, Maduro isn't backing down. He's doubling down. Three Aegis-class guided missile destroyers, 4,000 U.S. Marines, aircraft, ships, and missile launchers all heading to the Caribbean under the banner of fighting drug cartels. Trump has designated these gangs as global terrorist organizations, giving the U.S. military broad powers to act. This is the largest U.S. military deployment in Latin American waters since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The official story? Counter-narcotics operations. But when you deploy guided missile destroyers against speedboats carrying cocaine, something doesn't add up. The deployment comes with something else: legal authority for U.S. agencies to act against criminal organizations within the borders of other states. That means U.S. forces believe they have the right to operate inside Venezuelan territory. For any sovereign nation, that's not law enforcement, that's invasion. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel saw right through it.
The mentioned deployment of military units to the Southern Caribbean under the command of the Southern Command reportedly involves up to 4,000 troops and is presented under the false pretense of deterrence, under the false and disproportionate argument of combating drug cartels. This is being said and promoted by the most drug trafficking state in the world, the United States.
Nicolas Maduro didn't blink. Instead, he did something unprecedented. He called up 4.5 million militiamen across Venezuela. To put that in perspective, that's more soldiers than the entire U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines combined. But Maduro's response went beyond military mobilization. He turned to the cameras and issued a call that echoed across continents.
And I dare, from this ALBA platform, to call for the union of all rebellious peoples, of all social movements in Latin America, the Caribbean, the United States, Africa, and beyond, in defense of the Venezuelan people's right to sovereignty, peace, self-determination, and their future, their own development.
This wasn't just defiance. This was Maduro positioning Venezuela's fight as part of a global struggle against American hegemony. He connected Venezuela's crisis to Palestine, saying,
"If there's one thing that defines the era we're living through, and which we will emerge from stronger, more powerful, and victorious sooner or later, it's the cruelty and normalization of the use of force, of threats, of violence, and of crime in all its forms."
Maduro announced what he calls the third transformation, a complete restructuring of Venezuelan society for war. This is no longer about politics or economics. This is about survival. Within hours of the US deployment, something remarkable happened. Venezuela's National Assembly voted unanimously to defend their sovereignty. But the real story was happening across Latin America. First Vice President of Venezuela's National Assembly, Pedro Infante, delivered a message directly to Washington.
"I will tell North American imperialism. Here there are 30 million convictions, of wills, of brave people who are willing to do everything to defend sovereignty, to defend territorial integrity, to defend our leaders, to defend our President Nicolas Maduro."
30 million Venezuelans. That's the entire population ready to fight. But Venezuela wasn't standing alone. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel declared,
"This constitutes an unacceptable threat of aggression and violation of the sovereignty of the nations of the region, and a further disruption of the regime of peace and cooperation that the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean have worked so hard to guarantee."
Nicaragua's Daniel Ortega was even more direct. How is it possible that the whole of Latin America, a territory of peace, has not reacted unanimously and strongly to the threat posed by the tyrants in Washington, who are offering a reward of millions of dollars for the life of the legitimate president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela? Bolivia's Luis Archer cut to the heart of it.
"We know that behind this failed international war on drugs lies the obvious, and that the central objective is to hide from the world its real interest, to control Latin America geopolitically for the natural resources we have, and to destroy organized people to prevent us from following our own sovereign path."
The ALBA alliance, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, was mobilizing for something bigger than anyone expected. Then came the surprise. Brazil, led by Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who is at loggerheads with US President Trump, came out all guns blazing. Celso Amorim, chief advisor to Brazil's president, didn't mince words on slamming US bounty and military movements.
That is not international relations. That is not multilateralism. That is not what was created after the Second World War, such as the United Nations, the World Trade Organization that came after GATT, and the Bretton Woods institutions. That is violence.
The most chilling warning came from Colombian President Gustavo Petro. Colombia, traditionally one of America's closest allies in the region. His message was stark.
The gringos are in trouble if they think that by invading Venezuela, they can solve their problem. They would drag Venezuela into a Syrian-style situation, only with the added problem that Colombia would get pulled into the same mess, because these groups would come to seize the country's underground wealth, its minerals.
Syria. That one word carries the weight of 500,000 dead, millions of refugees, and a country torn apart by proxy wars. Petro wasn't just warning about Venezuelan casualties, he was warning that Colombia itself would be dragged into the conflict. Think about what we're looking at. Russia and Ukraine are locked in a grinding war of attrition. Israel and Hamas have turned Gaza into rubble. China and Taiwan edge closer to confrontation daily. Iran and its proxies face off against Israel across multiple fronts. Now add the Caribbean to that list. The fuse is lit. American warships are en route. Venezuelan militias are mobilized. Regional allies have chosen sides. And the world is watching to see if the Caribbean becomes the next front in an increasingly dangerous global confrontation. This isn't just about drugs anymore. This isn't even just about Maduro. This is about whether Latin America will accept American military intervention in 2025, or whether 30 million Venezuelans and their allies will fight back.